We believe that we should have moved to Plan B a long time ago. The countries that support the Syrian opposition confirmed their continued support for the opposition and their determination to do so. It was made very clear that Bashar al-Assad has two choices. Either he can be removed through a political process or he will be removed by force.
Arshad.
Can we start with Syria?
Sure.
What did you achieve out of today's ISSG in terms of halting the violence and furthering the effort to get a political solution?
That with respect to the cessation of hostilities, all the members of the ISSG, which now includes 4 additional countries, all of them agreed that to transform the cessation of hostilities to a true ceasefire. 2 things. One, they provided a process by which systemic or persistent violations can be brought to the ISSG writ large as a group to adjudicate, and 2, that persistent violations would render the violator ineligible to have the ceasefire applied to them. And I think that's the first time that the ISSG was so specific in terms of repercussions that could accrue or be applied to, is a better word to put it, to people that violate the cessation of hostility.
Can you envisage the United States or Russia actively targeting groups whom you believe are persistent violators of the ceasefire?
I don't want to get into hypothesizing about specific military operations.
Well, the reason I'm asking is that the utility of that threat, or the threat of consequences or repercussions, to use your word, rests largely on the credibility of the threat. And if you're not even willing to say that you could see this country or Russia directly going after the people you regard as responsible, I don't see why they should take this. Why should they take this this threat of repercussion seriously?
Well, I think just by dint of the kinds of strikes that have been done in the past in Syria, what we've seen certainly by the regime and also by the Russian military in the past, should be enough all by itself to indicate to those who would consider being persistent violators of the risk they're putting themselves and their forces under.
So this statement about the consequences of not sticking to the cessation, of not observing the cessation, I'm having a hard time understanding which violators that statement refers to.
All violators.
So does that include, because people from the podium there have talked about violators including the Syrian government, including the Iranians, Hezbollah, the Russians, and I'm trying to understand, how are they going to? I mean, when you talk about violators earlier today, you were saying, well, if they're violators, and they'll be, we've seen what the Syrian Air Force and the Russian Air Force has done, and this is the kind of thing that they would face. So, are you saying that the Iranians and the Syrians and the Russians are going to face the same kind of consequences?
I'm not going to speculate about specific consequences, but the short answer to your question is yes. If you look at the communique, it doesn't delineate one violator from another. And again, this is about persistent violations. This is about systemic violations. This is about people that violate the cessation in a manner, in a consistent, persistent way. And it doesn't delineate in there one from another. A violator of the cessation is a violator of the cessation. And if those violations persist, if they continue, and the ISSG has determined that they have done so in such a consistent, recalcitrant manner that they are no longer going to be considered a party to the cessation, then that's the decision the ISSG will make. And then that puts them at greater risk.
But the ISSG includes Iran and Russia, right?
Right.
and we're expecting them to, the ISSG as a group, including Iran and Russia, to say possibly that Russia or Syria has been a persistent violator?
Well, again,
If that happens?
I'm not going to hypothesize about future violations. Again, I'd point you back to the language today, that it doesn't discriminate. It says all violations that are persistent in nature and that the ISSG determines should no longer, whoever that group is, should no longer be allowed to consider themselves a party to the cessation by dint of their own actions against the cessation.